Okay, the slide of the SSPX in its historical context. The present situation of the SSPX is not foolproof. Father Pagliarani, the new Superior General, is an excellent thing that Bishop Foley is no longer Superior General. He was using his power and his authority as Superior General to drive the society in the wrong direction. The question now is the society going to go in a better direction? It depends upon Father Pagliarani. Father Pagliarani has the power, he has the position. He could eventually take the society in a different direction if he wanted to. Does he want to? It doesn't look like it. The indications at the moment are that it doesn't look like he wants to go in the right direction. So, if he doesn't want to go in the right direction, then it's going to continue along in the same direction. I'll give you just one indication. Some of you may have heard. The goings-on at the general chapter are meant to be kept secret. They even take an oath, the capitulants or the members of the chapter take an oath at the beginning of the chapter to not reveal what happened. But we know in public, the public result was that firstly, Bishop Foley was not re-elected at the beginning of the chapter, but then at the end of the chapter, he and Father Schmidberger were reinstated as members of the General Council. The General Council is normally three, the Superior General and two assistants. So this chapter invented a new job of councillor, and they invented that two of them, two councillors and they voted for two councillors, and it was Bishop Foley and Father Schmidberger. And so Bishop Foley and Father Schmidberger are back in the main decision-taking council of the society. Now, the Superior General is above that council. He doesn't have to listen to it. But can you imagine the capitulants, the members of the chapter, voting for an extra two people to go on to the General Council if Father Pagliarani himself hadn't made it clear either that he would like that or that he wanted it? Because can you imagine the capitulants voting in a new Superior General, and then, whether he likes it or not, putting another two people right at his elbows? I can't imagine that. What I can easily imagine is that the sweet, pious little members of the General Chapter of the Societies who buys the table, Father Pagliarani, who's also sweet and nice, said, "My sweet little capitulants, would you please vote for two of my best friends to be next to me? Oh yes, Superior General. We voted for you and we will do anything you like." Excuse the mockery, but I'm sure you see the point. If Father Pagliarani himself, how could the capitulants possibly vote in a new Superior General and then, whether he likes it or not, impose two extra councillors right by his side? I can't see that. What I can easily see, is that he himself says to the chapter, "I would like," and the chapter says, "Of course, what you want, we want." And if he puts Bishop Foley right back next to his side, and Father Schmidberger, who's got the same pro-Rome, anti-Archbishop Lefebvre line, it doesn't promise. It's not promising. I'm afraid that's the way it's going. I was talking just yesterday to some friends from Argentina who've known Father Pagliarani from his time at the head of the seminary in La Reca in Argentina. And these friends of mine say, he's all smiles, understand, but beneath the smiles there's something else. That's very possible, very likely. I'd say very likely. He was sedevacantist at one stage, but sedevacantism, or more or less sedevacantist, strongly sedevacantism, but sedevacantism and liberalism are heads and tails of the same coin. Therefore, the fact that he was a sedevacantist does not prove he's not a liberal. On the contrary. It doesn't look good. Well, the society is going to continue. There are a number of good priests in it. The Anglican Church has continued for 400 or 500 years now. It's false. It's basically false. But it's continued for 500 years. Why? Because Englishmen wanted it to continue. So the fact that it's nonsense, doesn't matter. We want a dummy church which we can put in our mouths and suck on and think that we're getting milk when we're getting nothing. And that's exactly what the Anglican Church is. It's a baby's dummy. But babies like babies' dummies, and mummies like babies' dummies, because they work, but they don't nourish. So the Anglican Church has staggered on for 500 years. The society could stagger on, but it's no longer going to be at the head like it was under Archbishop III. It's no longer going to be at the head of the defence of the faith. Under the Archbishop, the society really counted. The enemies just couldn't, they had to take it into account. And it did a lot to put brakes on the nonsense of Vatican II. The Archbishop put real brakes on Vatican II. He also ensured the survival of tradition. He ensured that the Tridentine Mass would survive, that the traditional rites would survive. He ensured the survival of all kinds of things. It was only very numerically, the society was never any more than a small movement, but it counted. Now it's going to be a small movement or a bigger movement, but it's not going to count. It's joining the enemy. It's joining the liberals. It's lost its punch. The salt has lost its savour. With the Archbishop, the Irish Society had savour, had kick, punch, no more. So it's going to continue, but it won't be the same. And I don't think Father Barry, I remember when Chris coming out of DC. I remember when John Paul II became Pope, the Archbishop Lefebvre said, if he does a clean house within 6 months, he's not going to change anything. And that's exactly what it was. If Father Barry does a clean house, he's not cleaning house right now. He's reappointing liberals. There's no indication that he doesn't like liberals. I'm afraid he's all smiles, but I'm afraid he's not the man that's needed. So maybe the man that's needed isn't there. Another sinister quotation, but right on the mark. Don Putti was the Italian editor of a journal called Sisi Nodo, which still exists, which is still running, and it's every 2 weeks, twice a month, from Italy. And that's again a journal that's read. It goes, only a few thousand subscribers, but it goes all around the Vatican and back again, because it's the truth. Don Putti, was a spiritual son of Padre Pio. He was an ex-military officer from the Italian army. He was a late vocation, and he founded a group of sisters, the Sisters of Velletri, and this magazine, this journal, Sisi Nodo, 8 pages. Nothing sensational, but truth and doctrinal attacks, not attacking the morals of these poor people in the Vatican, but attacking their doctrine, which is what matters. The morals, well, yeah, we're all of us weak, I mean, come on. But that's not the point. I mean, it was pretty darn grave in the case of the present church, but it's not the essential point. So Sisi Nodo concentrates on doctrine. And Don Putti was a friend, knew the Archbishop, met the Archbishop. The Archbishop used to go down and see him. When the Archbishop went down to Italy, he would be allowed to go and see Don Putti. Don Putti said to him at one stage, "Your Excellency, half your seminarians are modernists." That's true. I'm sure it's true. I'm sure it was true. Modernism is a sneaky thing. It's not a direct attack on one dogma. It's not the denial that Jesus Christ, it denies that Jesus Christ is God, but it doesn't say Jesus Christ is not God. It says Jesus Christ is God. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. But you see, well, today we might need to interpret that statement, because it's perfectly true, it's absolutely true, we're not denying, we're not heretics, but We're in the modern age, and in the modern age, you can't take things so literally as people always used to do. We're too smart today to take things so literally. So, by the time he's finished, there's not much left of the divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. He's denied it without denying it. It's a very sneaky technique. And that's what modernists do. And therefore, these dear boys, I'd call them boys, these dear young priests, these sweet young priests, let's call them that, they're very devout, very pious. They say Mass beautifully. They're pious. They're pious at 10,000 feet. They're so elevated above earth that they live and float at 10,000 feet. Oh, it's wonderful, it's lovely, it's sweet, it's very spiritual. But is it real? That's another question. It's a fantasy. Basically, it's a fantasy. They're living in fantasy. I'm afraid a mass of society priests, certainly not all, a mass of them, and they're in control. They've been in control since the 1980s. They were moving into control even before the Archbishop died. So that's life. That's the modern world. Liberalism runs in the blood of all of us. What is liberalism? It's the religion of liberty. Liberty from God. Because if you don't have liberty from God, what are all the other liberties worth? So the key liberty is religious liberty, which means liberty from God. To be what I want, how I want, when I want, where I want. That's liberalism. And it's very attractive, getting freedom from God. What puts any brakes or limits on me after that? So these sweet young priests, many of them born in the 1960s, after that terrible decade of revolution, the 1960s. Vatican II, the assassination of President Kennedy, the Vietnam War, Jim Morrison and all of the rockers and rollers, the Beatles, 1968 in Paris, a decade of revolution. The 1950s was still kind of in order, although the skids were under it, as they would say in America. The 50s were undermined. The 50s were just waiting to slide. The slide took place in the 1960s, and ever since, everything's been up for grabs. Since the 1960s. A few years ago, the Rolling Stones, all grey-haired and long in the tooth now, the Rolling Stones went down to Copacabana on a beach in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. They had a crowd of something like 2 million on the beach. The Rolling Stones. Now, the Rolling Stones were singing and jiving and the rest of it, 1960s, 1970s. So how old are they now in the 2010s? That makes them 60s, maybe, let's assume they were in their 20s. They're now in their 70s, 60s and 70s. But the millions turned out. Why? Because these millions, they had a purpose in life in the 1960s, and that was revolting against what still was standing of the system. But from the 60s onwards, there's been less and less left to kick against. They've had less and less purpose in life, these poor people. So they want to relive their 60s. So the Rolling Stones, oh yes, let's dream we're still punk rockers. You know what I mean? They've got nothing more important in their lives. So the 1960s were a dreadful decade, a very significant decade. And since, it's been downhill all the way, really seriously downhill. And so young men born and bred in the 1960s, or after, and that's many of the young priests of the society, they've got no sense of order in their bloodstream. All they've got is the Rolling Stones in their bloodstream, in a manner of speaking. So how do you expect them to have a sense of what Bishop Philly should be, instead of what he is? What he is somebody who caters to that to that way of life. So he caters to the modern man. He fits modern man. Modern man likes him. Modern young men will vote for it. They can't see what's wrong with him. I had an interesting letter from somebody in St. Mary's in Kansas a little while ago, and he taught St. Mary's for a while. There's the main centre of the SSPX in the United States, until he got thrown out, because undoubtedly he didn't fit the new style, the new direction of the society. He liked the old direction too much. So, thank you very much, we don't need your services any longer. And he said he went back, 4 or 5 of the young men that he had taught on the old system, invited them out to dinner. And he said, they're nice young men. They're succeeding in the modern world. They're marrying, they've got children. And he says, they haven't got a clue. They haven't got a clue. They're succeeding, they're successful, they're popular, they're charming, they're good company, they're fun. They invited him out. And all he could do was sort of cry interiorly. These young men don't know what life is all about. They don't dream that there's a problem. They don't see there's a problem. Nobody tells them there's a problem. The new priests, the new style of priests are telling them everything is sweet and nice and hunky-dory and peachy keen. And I know what he was talking about. I know what this old teacher, this sack teacher was talking about. There it is. The society is simply going with the stream. That's the stream, and the society is going with it. But that's not the future of the church. The future of the church goes through blood, suffering, a lot of suffering, and blood in the streets. That's where the church is going to come through that and come out of that. And it'll be, you will have an inkling, at least an inkling, because the old man kept hammering on it. So, well, we listened, and It's sliding the SSPX in its historical context. So, you start at the bottom of this schema. The colouring is wrong. All of that blue should be green, but that's a copying machine. You can't, I couldn't do anything about it. You start at the bottom. So you start at the bottom with the Church of the Middle Ages, which reaches across the whole of civilization, so to speak. It reaches across the bottom of the page, signifying the Church of the Middle Ages was in possession of all civilization, in a sense. Of course, the Chinese, the Indians, whatever you like. But Europe, the Catholic Church was in possession. And then you've got hell in the bottom left-hand corner, as you've got heaven at the top right-hand corner. And you've got a big arrow, it should be green, it's blue, I'll have to say blue from now on. A big blue arrow, it's a straight arrow, absolutely straight. The church doesn't change, the direction doesn't change. The church is as straight as an arrow. And it's an arrow that leads straight to heaven. If you can stay with it, it goes straight to heaven. So you've got at the top right-hand corner, straight line to heaven. And then, so heaven is in the top right-hand corner, hell is in the bottom left. Hell, the forces of hell are all in red for stop. And the blue should be green for go. And as you move up the schema, you can see that the red gets steadily broader, while the green gets steadily narrower. And that's a picture of the church retreating. You've got at the very top of the page, underneath the title, you've got in blue, the church's rear guard action. Ever since the Middle Ages, the church has been on the retreat. There was a time in church history when it was on the advance. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? There was a time when the church actually advanced. Wow. The first centuries. The age of the apostles, the age of the martyrs, the age of the doctors, then 1,000 years of Christendom, Middle Ages, and then the modern age starting with Luther, and from then on it's been downhill all the way. So, the advance of the bad guys and the retreat of the good guys. It's depressing, if you like, but our Lord reckoned on that. You may remember the quotation from the Gospels, "When I come back, shall I find the faith upon the earth?" Our Lord is going to come back. And when he comes back, he's telling us there's hardly going to be any faith on the earth. The church will almost have disappeared. So God has taken that into account. God has planned for that. Why does God plan for the apparent defeat of his church? Underline the word apparent. Those last struggles of the church will generate some of the greatest saints in all the history of the church. The terrible, terrible persecution by the Antichrist, which will be the most terrible persecution in all church history, will also generate some of the greatest saints in all history. Just like this Vatican II generated Archbishop Lefebvre. Without Vatican II, we would never have known the difference between Archbishop Lefebvre and a mass of the bishops of his time. They all went with Vatican II. And he was almost the only one, together with Bishop Castelmaier, who significantly resisted. We wouldn't have known that without Vatican II. He would have gone to his grave as a very fine, outstanding missionary bishop, but not that exceptional. As it is, he showed the crisis brought out that he was exceptional. So the persecution of the Antichrist will bring out some great, and that's why Almighty God allows for the Antichrist and for the persecution by the Antichrist. There are 7 ages of the church, 3 rising, Christendom, 3 falling, or 3 taking part in the fall. The 6th will be another rise, in fact, but it will then fall. Each age will produce its own kind of saints. A gardener who wants to make a nice garden doesn't plant only roses. He plants a variety of flowers. If Almighty God wants to make his heaven a beautiful heaven, he's going to have a variety of saints, not just the saints of successful Catholicism, but the saints also of its persecutions and defeats, which also generate saints. So Almighty God doesn't see things the way we see. We see a rise, Christendom, and a fall. God doesn't see a fall. God sees 3 more ages, generating 3 more kinds of saints to decorate his heaven, to be happy in his heaven. So, the Church of the Middle Ages is broader than the green, the blue, is broader at the bottom of the page than it is anywhere else on the page. That was the human success of Catholicism in the Middle Ages, the steady human defeat of Catholicism ever since, which is why we are today with our backs to the wall. So, you've got on the extreme left side the various ages. You've got 16 in a big C. Big C stands for century. This is bottom left-hand corner. So in the 16th century, you've got Protestantism. In the 18th century, you've got liberalism. Around 1900, you had modernism. 1962 to 1965, you had Vatican II. And 2012, you had Bishop Furley pushing to get the society into and under official Rome. 16th century, Protestantism. Protestantism splits Christendom, that's all in red. And you've got the 1/3 of Europe fought against the 2/3 of Europe, of Christendom. Christendom is the Denmarks. 2/3 of Christendom keep the faith, 1/3 loses the faith, including England, of course. Scandinavia, England, North Germany especially. And between the 1/3 that lost the faith and the 2/3 that kept the faith were a series of wars, fights. You had the 30 years, that wasn't the first. You had in France, you had the wars of the Fronde. Let's say the Protestants in France made a good effort to grab hold of France. They failed because the Catholics were still strong enough in France. But you had a series of wars in the late 1500s. In England, you had, of course, the martyrs in the 1600s, in the 1500s. But then in the 1600s, it came to war, the Civil War in England. Charles I against Oliver Cromwell. It wasn't Catholics against Protestants, but it was Catholic Protestants against Protestant Protestants. In other words, everybody was Protestant, But nevertheless, there was a serious enough difference between the English Protestants, between the radical Protestants who were Puritans, and the nostalgic Protestants who were half Catholic still, the Cavaliers. And it was serious enough to come to a serious fight. And you may remember the Cavaliers lost. Usually in the modern world, the good guys do lose. It's exceptional for the good guys to win. Because the world is sliding away from God. The good guys are always on the side of God. Those who fight the good guys are against God, usually. So the Cavaliers lost, and the Roundheads under Cromwell won. And the reason why the bad guys win is because they were Protestants. They're all of a piece. They're all rotten, completely rotten, seriously, consistently rotten. And so the Cavaliers were only half rotten, because they fabricated the Anglican Church so that it would be a baby's dummy. They hankered after the thing. They hankered after some of those Catholic values and Catholic this and that and the other. They weren't absolutely anti-Catholic. That means they were divided. So the fighters that are not divided are going to always be, with two fists, going to be the fighters who've got one hand tied behind their backs. And the Cavaliers, since they weren't rabid Protestants, they weren't all the way Protestants like Cromwell, rotten Puritans. And therefore the Puritans win. And the same, there was a rerun of that in the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, when the North beat up the South. The South were Protestants, but like the Cavaliers, they were old world Protestants, kind of Anglican, whereas the North were Puritans. The northeast of the United States is Puritan, Boston, New England. Puritanism is horrible. It's Calvinist, horrible. And you scratch the countries that have been Puritan, and you find the Puritanism at a layer. England, Puritanism came from England. It crossed the Atlantic with the Mayflower, and the Puritans won out over in the United States, also with the American Civil War. That's again the left beating up the right, because the liberals are crusaders. The liberals and Protestants, they're crusaders. They're going to smash these old-fashioned, silly, backward Catholics. We're going to create a brave new world without God. We don't. No. We are more godly. We protest against Catholicism because Catholicism needs reformation. We are going to establish a reformation. We're going to be more Christian than the Catholics. That's the idea. And therefore it's a crusade to smash the Catholics. They're crusading against God. Liberals crusade against God. Liberals are all crusaders. And they're fighting God. They won't admit it, of course. They say that we are communism. Communism is another of these. Well, communism is openly against God. But it's another pretense. Somebody once explained communism to Winston Churchill. He snorted. Churchill snorted, and he said, Christianity with a tomahawk. Meaning, it's all sweet and trying to appear, communism is all sweet and trying to imitate and appear like Christianity, but in fact, if you don't agree with them, they're going to smash your head in with a tomahawk. The communists are going to smash your head in if you don't allow it, if you let it become tomahawk. Churchill is so correct. Churchill is right. That is communism. Love of neighbour, and smash the neighbour if you won't agree. Love of democracy, and if you don't agree, we will bomb you into democracy. We will bomb you back into the Stone Age so that you have to become democratic. Always the same. Down the ages, it's always the same. So, the Protestantism splits Christendom. 1/3 gets into a fight with the 2/3 of Christendom. Go to the top again, and you see, on the second line, underneath the slide, you see age. The major stages of the Great Apostasy, in red. And then cross swords, which is, when I used to go to school, when I was at primary school, we always had a battle. The sign of a battle was the crossed swords. Probably isn't that now. Sign of a battle now is probably two babies' dummies sort of kissing one another. So clashes, the cross swords, the black cross swords are a clash. So the bad guys apostatizing and the church being rocked on its heels again and again. So the 1/3 Protestantism clashes with the 2/3 of Christendom, but the 2/3 of Christendom get their act together. Again, the Catholics would not have got their act together without a serious provocation. That serious provocation was Luther. And the result was the Counter-Reformation in 2 sessions in the middle of the 1500s. And that, the Counter-Reformation resulted, go one stage over, one line higher, a tremendous missionary extension of the church, for instance, in Latin America. Latin America, there was, of course, Isabella and Ferdinand that sent Columbus across the ocean. Interestingly, Columbus went to Isabella and Ferdinand the first time, and they turned him down. And if he allowed himself to be discouraged, he would never cross the ocean. But he went to see a friend, a Capuchin, in a Franciscan monastery or friary. And the friend pumped him up again with the courage to go back a second time to see the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. And this time they backed his expedition. And it was a Catholic expedition. Of course, today they will tell you it was purely for money. That's the black legend, as the Spaniards call it. The black legend of the vile Protestants who invent all kinds of lies about the Spanish Empire and about Spain because it was Catholic. And the Spanish Empire was Catholic. The Spaniards were able to police the whole of South America. Well, of course, Brazil was Portuguese. But the Spaniards policed all of their nations in South America with 20,000 soldiers. That was enough. Admittedly, the Latin American peoples are not very warlike. They're not so warlike. But even so, that's not many police. But you don't need police if you have priests who teach, who preach, and teach people that this is the way to go to heaven. And then the peoples realize that they're being looked after, their internal good welfare is being looked after. The British Empire never had that. The British Empire did allow for Irish missionaries to go everywhere. The British Empire was liberal, therefore it did allow Catholicism. But it was never Catholic itself, obviously not. It was a Freemasonic. So, the Spanish Empire was a tremendous Catholic enterprise. We don't learn much about it. Millions and millions of souls must have been saved in all of Latin America by the Portuguese and the Spaniards. Despised, of course, by we superior Anglos, because of course we know how life works, and we control the world, and we dominate the world. We're superior. We're a superior race. But there you are. Well, so you make a black legend. If anybody tries to say that the Spanish Empire was something, you make a black legend to you create horrible propaganda, you recreate lies in order to promote your wonderful new liberal order, world order. The Counter-Reformation, which was a great success, and the church pulled itself together, and there was a tremendous missionary effort, and the result was we rise to the next clash, which was not this time between part of Christendom and another part of Christendom. This time it's more or less between the state and the church. So we're into liberalism. Liberalism is, just mention it, it's a doctrine, it's a religion in fact. It's a religion because it pretends to be superior to Catholicism or Protestantism. Thanks to Protestantism having established itself in the face of Catholicism, opposite Catholicism. Thanks to Protestantism having established itself, from then on there's no longer a monopoly on the truth. From then on, there are two truths, so to speak. There can't be two truths with a clash, but you adapt your mind so that there can be two truths that clash. In other words, you dissolve your mind. You dissolve your mind. Catholics strengthen the mind, use the mind, support the mind, back the mind, use the mind, profit by the mind. No, Protestants and liberals, no. I don't want to know the truth. I want what I want. And Luther talks about the whore, the prostitute reason. Reason for Luther is a prostitute. He's deliberately despising the mind so that he will be liberated from the truth. If I undo my mind, the truth no longer holds. So I undo my mind in order to undo the truth, to get out from under the truth. That's Protestantism. And once Protestantism, and this is why Catholics fought, because the Catholics at the time, they could see that if this error establishes itself, then there are going to be very serious consequences for the faith and for the salvation and damnation of souls. So that's why the Catholics put up a strong fight. But they didn't win. There was not enough faith in all of Europe for the Catholics to win. They won in France finally, they won in South Germany, they won in Italy, Spain, Poland, so on, and Ireland. But there were parts where they didn't win, and the result was that Protestantism established itself. And from then on, somebody would come along and say, I'm neither Protestant nor Catholic, I'm superior to both. That's Freemasonry and that's liberalism. If Protestantism wasn't there, they couldn't say they were superior. But since the Catholics have not been strong enough to beat down Protestantism, then the liberals can say, I'm superior to both. That is exactly Freemasonry. So liberalism rises thanks to Protestantism. You got it there, 1789. It burst out especially in the French Revolution, which was very anti-Catholic, essentially anti-Catholic. The purpose of the French Revolution was to pull down altar and throne. They failed to pull down the altar, but they did pull down the throne. Only with Vatican II did they succeed in pulling down the altar as well. It's all the same line. It's continuous right through the centuries. So how they did it then was they didn't say that they wanted to be, well, that's not quite true. I was going to say they didn't say they wanted to be free from the church, because Voltaire certainly wanted that, and they did want to pull down throne and altar. But they succeeded with the state, and therefore from now on, from liberalism onwards, the enemies of God control the state, broadly speaking. They didn't succeed in controlling the church. Therefore, there's a clash between the state and the church. And from now on, the church has got to live in a very different world. In a Catholic world, the church and state are united, and it's a very natural thing for them to unite. The church can render a great service to the state can render a great service to the church. If the state makes abortion illegal, it's a serious support to the law, the moral law, and to the church. Whereas if the state approves abortion, it's a tremendous blow for the church. The church has no longer got the support of the state to stop abortion. The state is now allowing abortion. Nobody will be executed or even imprisoned any longer for committing an abortion. So the state is no longer the ally of the church. Therefore, the church is living on a different foundation. When the church and the state are allied, the church has got the whole system of the state behind it and with it. The church has got a much securer footing in society. But if the state is against the church, then all of the citizens who naturally tend to go with the state, who naturally respect the state, who naturally look up to their politicians to a certain extent, politicians have got more and more of a bad name as the modern world goes on, because they're more and more serving in the war against God. That's why the politicians have such a bad name. But they didn't always have a bad name, as bad name as they have today. Today they're despised, with good reason, because they are serving against God. Whether people admit that that's the reason or not, that is what's going on. Then what interests are they representing? Usually mammon. They're servants of mammon, modern politicians. So the state is now involved in fighting. The church has no longer got the state for its friend, The church is trying to convert souls in a society which is officially against the church. Officially, it's now liberal. So, when it's liberal, it pretends that it's not against the church. It pretends that it's in favour of all religions. It pretends that it's not against religion. It pretends it's not against God. But if you say, it's like Jesus and Barabbas. Pontius Pilate pretended that he wasn't against Jesus. But you put Barabbas on an equal footing with Jesus, who is the crowd going to prefer? They're going to prefer Barabbas. You put the church on an equal footing with error and with heresy and with crime, people are going to go with error, heresy and crime. That's original sin. So the world went with, the world was going with liberalism, and right through the 19th century, the world became more and more liberal. Liberalism had original sin on its side, and it had history on its side. The church was really, from the French Revolution onwards, the church was more and more up against it, with its back to the wall, so to speak. And then, but the church defended itself. There was still enough faith. You go through the French countryside, and at least, I'd a guess, I've never seen a proper statistic, I'd a guess, at least half the parish churches that you see were built in the 19th century. In other words, in France, after the French Revolution, there was a considerable religious revival. Especially the year 1830s were a good year. Even in England, Protestant England, the 1830s were the years of Newman, of Faber, the 1830s and 1840s. It was the second spring. In England, it was what we call the second spring of Catholicism. So it was a good time for Catholicism in England even, so all over. So the church, but then from the 1840s, the 1850s, it was downward towards the modern world. So liberalism, but the church did put up a fight. And you've got there the anti-liberal popes. There was a series of them. They were good popes, pretty good popes, one after another. Pius VI, Pius VII, one or two others, then Gregory XVI, Pius IX. Pius IX is a very interesting case. He's the longest reigning pope in all the history of the church. He became pope in 1846. He died in 1878. That made a reign of 32 years, even longer than St. Peter. St. Peter is right up there, but the longest reigning was Pius IX. Interestingly, when he arrived in 1846 at the papacy, he was not all that old, obviously, and he was sympathetic to the liberals. The liberals had been still causing trouble in the pontifical states, which at that time was still governed by the church, directed by the church. And when he became pope, he tried to be a good guy. He tried to be nice to them. And what was the result? In 1848, bloody revolution broke out in Rome, right under his nose. He had his prime minister running of the states, Count Rossi, shot under his eyes, almost under his eyes, or under them. He had to learn the hard way that liberals are not sweetie pies. Liberals have hands, claws dripping with blood. Liberals are not nice guys. And these liberals, they had it in for Pius IX. However nice he tried to be with them, it wasn't going to wash. They were going for broke. They would go for power. They drove him out of Rome. He had to flee Rome through a back door of the Vatican, dressed in black instead of white, so he wouldn't be recognized. In a friend's coach down to Naples, there was no revolution in Naples, so he went down that direction. He could only come back. Rome only quietened down after a year and a half. But when Pius IX came back, he had understood what liberalism is and who liberals are. And from then on, he was positively, directly, successfully anti-liberal. He understood liberalism, which a poor Bishop Foley just doesn't understand. And most of the sweet priests of the Society of Pius X don't understand. They don't realize it's a matter of blood. That the servants of the devil are going for broke. They're serious. Oh no, everybody's nice. It's this Disneyland world. smiley, smiley Disneyland world in which everybody's nice. Sound of music. The hills are alive with the sound of music. Ah, everybody's nice, except, of course, the Nazis are now. Original sin has been replaced by Nazi sin. The Nazis are wicked, and only Nazis. Everybody else is naive. Stupidity. Foolishness, stupidity. So, there was a great extension of the church that resulted, that came to an end kind of when the liberalism took back the state, or took over the state, took over the states, took over politics. Religion was kind of pushed off into the sacristy. It had to survive without being in Parliament any longer. It had to survive without Parliament. That's a completely different way of life for the church. The church had to get used to it. The church made a good shot at getting used to it. And the doctrine of that church, the doctrine of the new old doctrine has always been the doctrine of the church. But part of the old doctrine of the church we needed to be renewed was the anti-liberal part of church doctrine. And those are the papal encyclicals, which you see in a prominent box there in the middle. The papal encyclicals, starting in, let's say, you might say, starting with Mirari Vos, actually before that, but Mirari Vos was 1832, and the last of those, the great encyclicals, was under Pius XII, Humani Generis, about 1950 or 1951. So you've got about 120 years of excellent anti-liberal doctrine. So the liberals have taken over the state, they've taken over the parliament, they've taken over education, they've taken over people's minds. The church is being pushed back into the sacristy and the seminary, so to speak. The church puts up a good fight in the sacristy and the seminary. The church pulls her doctrine together in the papal encyclicals. And there is another great missionary effort, a new missionary effort, you see in the next line above, a new missionary expansion, which is Africa. Africa was opened up to the church in the 19th century, or Black Africa was opened up like it hadn't been opened before. Africa had only had the coast touched by the missionaries, the Portuguese missionaries going around, which is with the origin of today's Portuguese-speaking countries like Angola on the west and Mozambique on the right. That's simply because the missionaries stopped on the coast there, and then they went into the hinterland to some extent. But Africa, Black Africa was really open during the 19th century. And so what you see that, go back down to the first clash of swords, and you see a red arrow, which is the Protestantism developing from that clash. But then there's also a green arrow rising to the left, meaning that each time there's a Catholic reaction, the Catholic Church reconquers some ground. So that the movements of these arrows to the right suggest the Catholic Church regaining lost ground. It never regained at all. Donoso Cortes, great Catholic thinker of the Spanish 19th century, again, a convert from liberalism, and there's nothing like a convert to understand what he's coming out of, like St. Augustine understood Manichaeism. Donoso Cortes said, once a nation loses the faith, it never gets it back. Once a nation loses the faith, it never gets it back. Individuals can lose the faith and get it back. Nations, no. That's a terrible sin. But what's happening today is all of the Catholic nations are losing the faith. And they won't get it back, according to Donoso Cortes. It's going to take a chastisement for the world to recover Catholicism, to recover its faith, to get its faith back. And that chastisement is coming. So, because there's no other solution. So, you see that the Counter-Reformation regained ground. The 19th century Catholicism regained ground, thanks amongst other things to the papal encyclicals, opening up a missionary effort in Africa. And then came a small conquest of modernism. And that was modernism, a small conquest of the bad guys, and that's modernism. So liberalism arose thanks to Protestantism. Modernism thanks to a world, I can't even read that, moulded, a world moulded by Protestantism and liberalism. So each stage, major stage of evil, is building on the previous stages, which is logical. So what happens at the end of the 19th century, at the end of this century giving itself over to liberalism by the weakness of men, what you have is Catholic priests who say, a handful of Catholic priests, it wasn't many, a handful of priests who say, the modern world is out of step with the church is out of step with the modern world. We need to modernize the church. We need to update the church. We've got to get the church back in step with the world, because that way the church will save the world and the church will no longer be cut off from the world. So we're going to rescue both the world and the church by bringing the two closer together and by adapting the church to the world. In other words, fitting the church to the modern world is the era of modernism. And it follows on liberalism and Protestantism because the modern world in 1900 had been moulded, deeply influenced by Protestantism and liberalism. The two go together, or liberalism goes together with Protestantism. Protestantism is at the root of it. So modernism, thanks to a world moulded by Protestantism and liberalism, and you've got there the clash this time. It's a clash of ideas. It's not a clash of weapons or armies or even of state and church. It's a clash between a small handful of priests and a few laity and Pope Pius X. Pope Pius X was the Pope from 1903 to 1914, 11 years. He came from a peasant family. He was a peasant stock. He was not middle class. The French Revolution was middle class. It wasn't the aristocrats, well, a few, no, it was. There were a few aristocrats in the French Revolution, and they were very sinister people because they were betraying their way of life, what should have been their way of life. They were betraying. They were joining the rabble in order to guillotine the other aristocrats. A lot of the aristocrats were guillotined. It was the middle class. The working class doesn't usually make revolutions. It hasn't got it all together up here. It's got the working class, with exceptions, is not capable of ideology or of ideas. It's living too much at all its day-to-day life to get to the level of ideas and revolutionary ideas. The aristocrats have been deliberately corrupted ever since the French Revolution. The bad guys have set out to corrupt the aristocrats. And in Spain today, I've heard it from more than one Spanish aristocrat, says the aristocrats are rotten. And the bad guys set out to rob the aristocrats so that they won't ever become it. The aristocrats had, for a long time, the right ideas to lead society. The old saying for the aristocrats was, noblesse oblige. Nobility is an obligation. Nobility is not just a privilege. Nobility is an obligation. Nobility is a drag, you might say. Of course, the revolutionaries pretend that it's just all privilege and unearned privilege and luxury and situation much better than anybody else, undeserved and etc. No. The aristocrats used to be the greatest servants of society because they led it in the right direction towards God. The French Revolution stopped that. The French Revolution dethroned the aristocracy and replaced the aristocracy with the middle class. And the middle class are neither peasants nor aristocrats. They're capable of ideology, and they have a revolutionary ideology to get rid of the aristocrats. But they haven't got their feet on the ground like the peasants. In the old days, in the wicked old days, both aristocrats and peasants used to have their feet on the ground. The aristocrats also had their head in the clouds. They got on perfectly well, there were no revolutions, not any worth speaking of. But the middle class arose and it wanted to take over, and from the French Revolution onwards, it took over. And then the communists came along and took over and killed the middle class. got rid of the middle class. Because the middle class, in its turn, had ceased to deserve to lead. I don't know if it ever deserved to lead. Some did. But they didn't have the same sense of obligation that the aristocrats at their best had. The middle class was mammon, essential mammon. Money, comfort, a nice house, 2 cars, 3 fridges, etc., etc., etc. 5 vacations, and so on and so on. That's the middle class. And it's not, there's no sense of service, not usually any, there can be, but it's not, a sense of service is not intrinsic to the middle class. It was intrinsic to the Roman centurion, it was intrinsic to the aristocrats, the best of them anyway. Pius X came from a peasant family, therefore he was not middle class, therefore he understood liberalism. Somebody from the middle class is liable not to understand liberalism. It's too much in him. He's got to step out of his own skin in order to realize what liberalism is. So, Pius X understood this dream of replacing, of changing the church to fit the world, this dream that the liberal world is fine, that we're creating a lovely new world order, and all the church has got to do, needs to do, is to adapt itself to it, and then the church will be happy, and the world will be happy, we will all be happy in the new world order. Pius X said, no way, Jose, no way, no way, no way. It's nonsense. Leo XIII was an aristocrat, but he didn't completely understand the revolution, and he made some Leo XIII was the Pope before Pius X, from 1878 to 1903, and he hadn't completely understood. He wrote some excellent encyclicals, he was very good doctrine, but there's the problem. You can be very good at doctrine and then not good at applying it. You don't see how it applies. Bishop Fully has got the Catholic doctrine, he learned it in the seminary under Archbishop Lefebvre. He learned the doctrine, but he doesn't see how it applies. And therefore, he thinks he's Catholic, he wants to be Catholic, he means to be Catholic, God knows he may well have the faith, God knows. I think probably he does have the faith, but he has no idea how the faith applies in today's world. He's got no sense that Rome is absolutely crazy, sick, because he doesn't understand liberalism. Rome is sick with liberalism. If you don't understand liberalism, how can you understand the sickness of Rome? And if you're middle class, like Bishop Fully, like myself, it's not easy to understand liberalism. It's a gift of God. It's a gift. Because it looks nice. Liberalism looks nice. It looks sweet. It's a very good imitation. Like communism, communism and liberalism and Protestantism, they're all imitating Catholicism and destroying it. False imitations. So, Pius X fought modernism. He recognized what these characters were up to. Their idea of revolutioning the church, putting the church through a revolution in order to fit the corrupt modern world, Pius X saw that's no good at all. And so he condemned, he went to the root of the error. The last time I was here talking, I was talking about Passion, which is the great encyclical of Pius X. The longest, most difficult, and most important of all the encyclicals. The most radical, the most deep-going. And it's the corruption of the mind, it's the unhooking of the mind, the undoing of the mind, that Pius X said is the problem. And it goes way back to Protestantism. Luther called the mind a whore, or the reason a whore, and from then on it's been feelings. Feelings. There's a song about feelings. Feelings. Well, yes, but that reminds me of a story. There was this motorist rolling down the highway with his wife next to him, and the door got open. She fell out, And as it happens, he didn't notice for some reason. And there was a police car behind and saw the wife fall out. And vroom, came up to him. Sir, do you realise there's a woman beside you, she's fell out of the car. She's lying on the roadside, a little ways back. Oh, thank you, officer. Thank you. I thought I'd gone deaf. Feelings. So Pius X used his mind big time, and he got somebody very smart to write Pascendi and analyze where the real problem is. And the real problem of modern times is this undoing of the mind. And that's why the novel order is effeminate. Not all women are effeminate, but women at their worst is a quality of men. Men are effeminate. Effeminate men are effeminate. Because it's feelings. It's men whose minds are no longer functioning and who go by their feelings. That's modernism. I feel that the modern world is nice. I feel that Walt Disney means well. I feel that liberalism is lovely. No. Feelings, well, anyway, all right. So, the undoing of the mind. The clash this time was an intellectual clash, a clash of ideas. It took place in the early 1900s. And on the side of the modernists this time, there's only a small number. And on the side of the Catholics, which was the large number, Pius X scotched this snake in the priesthood before he could do too much damage. And therefore the church stayed strong. But the liberal snake, he simply went underground, and they waited for the opportunity to come up again, which they knew would come. And they knew it would come because of original sin, because they knew that the modern world was degenerating. The modern world was going in their direction. And all they had to do was to wait, and they would be able to triumph. It took a while, but sure enough, the time came in the 1950s. In 1958, Pius V dies, and then modernism immediately rises again and takes over the church. But Pius X gained a 50-year reprieve for the church. Pascendi 1907, death of Pius XI 1958, that was 51 years. Because Pius X had it clear, because he was a peasant. He was not middle class. That's caricature, but I think you can see what I mean. Some peasants are darn crooked, some of them are darn villains. There's no point in sanctifying all peasants. But peasants have a quality of common sense which your middle class is losing all the time. People today are losing common sense. There's a massive loss of common sense today. Because common sense is the sense of reality. Common sense is part of human nature. Human nature comes from God. If you're making war on God, you will make war on human nature. If you make war on human nature, you will make war on common sense. And you will persuade everybody that women need to be like men and that men need to be like women. And everybody will buy it. In a corrupt, silly, bourgeois, middle-class, industrialized, suburban world, watching television, in a world of televidiots, idiots watching television all the time, in a world of televidiots, common sense is disappearing. And the bad guys leading the world of televidiots are deliberately wiping out common sense, because you wipe out common sense and then you can do what you like with human beings. People will go whatever way you like. And you will succeed in persuading them that men should be women and women should be men. And you will defeminize the women and turn them into somethings on wheels. You can know the expression. And you will demasculinize the men, and you will turn the men into wimps. And you'll turn the women into horrors. And women lose their femininity. It's a horror. Women without femininity, it's a horror. But that's what we've got today. And men without masculinity. Women don't wear trousers. Don't wear trousers. and men be men. Pius X sees, and again, the result is in the early 1900s, another upswing of Catholicism. We have Chesterton, Belloc here in England, Benson, famous converts, and sometime around then, the building of Westminster Cathedral, which is a beautiful building. It still is unfinished, so the decoration is far from finished, but it's a beautiful building. And there's obviously a lot of faith in England around the late 1900s. Cardinal Manning, a lot of faith to put together a building like that. A lot of money, a lot of faith. It's a monument. So missionary efforts of the 20th century, early 20th century, again, there's, I think possibly in Asia especially, again you've got an expansion, the green arrow going towards the top left, meaning that there was another extension of the church in this. But underneath, the priests are losing it. They're losing the sense of reality. And modernism is coming back in the 1920s, 1930s. It's waiting for its moment. And then there's the war, the Second World War, which discredits all ideas, all doctrines, all ideologies, all fascism, Nazism, it's all discredited. The mind is very discredited, and people come out. Because of the suffering, the church has 5 good years, 1940 to 1945 to 1950. The statue of Our Lady of Fatima circulates during those years with great success all over the world. War had brought back some sense of reality. But once the war was 5 years old, it was 5 years in the past, then the unreality and the refusal of God and the dissolution of the mind and the synchronizing of church and world, it all began to come back. And the last years of Pius XII's reign were not as good as the early years. And when he died in 1958, everything was ready for the most terrible red advance of all, which you got at Vatican II. And you see on the chart, 62 to 65, those are the years of Vatican II. And the red extending this time almost across the whole page. Vatican II, why? Or neo-modernism, in other words, the revival of modernism. Thanks to a world of hearts and minds corrupted in depth by Protestantism, liberalism and modernism. The rot has been at work for a long time, and it's been piling up, and this time it really breaks inside the church with the Second Vatican Council. And you've got this time, there's no longer a small number of the bad guys and a large number of good guys. This time it's the great majority are on the side of the council and the small minority on the side of tradition. That's why tradition is so cramped up against the straight arrow. But tradition is following, of course, in the line of Pius X, which is why Archbishop chose that saint for his society, in the line of the papal encyclicals, which is why Archbishop Lefebvre very much encouraged the seminarians to get to know the encyclicals. He himself taught them. In line with the anti-liberal popes, in line with the Counter-Reformation, in line with the medieval church. So the Catholicism doesn't change direction, it's exactly the same direction. A straight arrow. And Archbishop Lefebvre is in that line. So you've got Archbishop Lefebvre was the outstanding opponent of Vatican II. He was pretty much on his own. He began the society in 1970. He was joined in public by another bishop only in 1981, when Bishop de Castelmayor associated with him in public. And the two of them wrote 2 letters, public letters, to John Paul II, warning him what he was doing. John Paul II paid no attention. Because, why put yourself in his place? He's got, let's say, 4,000 bishops in the world, 2,000 of them are liberal, and they accuse John Paul II of being a stick in the mud, of being too conservative, of being too old-fashioned, of being so and so on. And the other 2,000 are conservative, and they congratulate him for being conservative. So he's got the whole 4,000 bishops telling him he's conservative. He's conserving the faith. And then he's got two that tell him, you're not concerning the faith, Holy Father, you're wrecking it. How do you expect him to take two seriously against 4,000? So, you can imagine that the Archbishop wrote, caused to put together a famous cartoon, and the cartoon showed John Paul II being refused entry to heaven because he was liberal. And the cartoon is well done. You can find it without too much difficulty. It scandalized some people because you couldn't criticize the popes. After Catholics had had good popes for so long, they couldn't get into their heads that they could have bad popes. Again, the liberalism is such a slimy thing, it looks like the real article, and so you switch from the real article to the non-real article, and people, the Catholics, don't notice. Paul VI, they think he's a great pope. He's John Paul II, they call John Paul the Great. The Catholics even today, they just don't have an inkling that there's a serious problem with the council. So the Archbishop was pretty much on his own, but he, thanks to some outstanding personal qualities, he succeeded in founding the society. But what bricks was he building with? Mostly he was building with modern young men. He had a few old priests who were with him and helped him to start the society. And then he had these youngsters who joined him. The youngsters were all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as this American expression goes. And I was one of them at the time, in the 1970s. Oh, the great Archbishop, oh, wonderful, oh, lovely, oh, sweet, oh, nice. And there he was, like Mother Duck on the farm, and he had all these little ducklings in a row behind him. He led us all across the pond. It was captivating. And the young seminaries, we were captivated. He's a charismatic leader, a charismatic Catholic, tremendous charisma, tremendous sanctity. He wasn't faultless. He wasn't faultless. I can remember, I can remember once I was walking down a corridor with him, and there was a seminary coming the other way. And when he had passed us, and he was out of earshot, the Archbishop turned to me and said, "Oh, if only all the priests were if only all the seminaries were like him." Because that seminary was very, very pious, very outwardly correct and serious and pious. And the Archbishop said, "I wish all seminaries were like him." Later, he fell for a mother of 8 children and gave her another 2 or 3. And the last I heard, he's working in a prison. And I heard also he thinks of suicide every day. It's a tragic case. I mean, there are tragic cases. I doubt that he's committed suicide even since. But it wasn't as perfect, as he didn't last the course. Of course, there are always priests that are not going to last the course. God help us. But this one that the Archbishop so admired was not one who lasted the course. The Archbishop liked the surface perhaps a little too much and discerned what was beneath perhaps. He had pretty much discerned, but it wasn't infallible. Let's just say it wasn't infallible. We're not pretending that the Archbishop was absolutely infallible, he was certainly not God, etc., etc. But he was a very great churchman, judging by his fruits. He saved Catholic tradition almost single-handed, not single-handed, but almost single-handed, when it was being trampled upon from the very top of the church downwards. He had the whole official church against him, and here he was on his own, standing for tradition. He's won. Tradition has survived. Somebody was just telling me that in the Novice Order Church, wherever you find parish life flourishing, wherever there's some real spiritual progress, wherever there are real Catholic fruits, you find the old Mass within the Novice Order. Because, of course, it can spring up now. It's still disapproved, basically, by the authorities. But it's springing up despite. And where it does spring up, it produces the same old fruit. good fruits inside the monastery. So the Archbishop was one. But of course, the bad guys are still in control of the machine of the church from the very top, and therefore we've got a ways to go before we emerge into, come out of the tunnel. So then you've got, of course, once again, opposite the Archbishop, you see a green arrow, a blue arrow, leading forward, upwards and leftwards, because there was a worldwide extension of the Society of Christ on Earth. There was a response all over the world. People in Australia were soon getting in touch with him. I can remember there was an Indian who got in touch with him, and the Archbishop sent me during a summer vacation to the seminary to pass through India to meet up with these people, and then also to go through Japan and meet a contact there, and then the Philippines. He sent them a tour of the world to meet these various people who got in touch with him because they learned about him through the paper. I remember in India, it's very interesting, in India, in Kerala, which is one of the most Catholic parts of India, pagan India does have some Catholic parts, and one of them is Kerala. And this was an Indian, 60 years old maybe, P.J. Sebastian, I remember his name. And he welcomed me, I landed there and he welcomed me, put some flowers around my neck and so on. And then he made me meet, he introduced me to about 16 priests, 16 conservative priests that he knew all over various parts of Kerala. Not too far from where he was, I forget his city. Anyway, and every one of these priests knew about Archbishop Lefebvre. Every one of them knew. And they knew what he was standing for. And they knew what he was fighting for. And they didn't go along. They were sympathetic because they were conservative. That was why they were friends of this layman. But they didn't go along. It's an old story. But the Archbishop was reaching out in all directions, and there was a reaction from all over the world, and he built up the society. I say he didn't have judgment, that's very, very inadequate, because he had judgment to see who he could build with in all parts of the world, and he built. He built seminaries, he built convents, he built seminaries. He didn't yet build cathedrals, but he built a lot of fine churches. So there was a worldwide extension of the Society of Christ. And therefore, once again, the true religion was knocked back and then began expanding again. And then again, the devil gets in. And this time, it's the SSPX push towards an agreement with Rome, thanks to priests weakened by the modern world. That's to say, Don Putti had said, Your Excellency, half of your seminarians are modernists. Because Don Putti saw that the bug was in these sweet young men. Despite themselves, they're not aware of it. You try telling Bishop Fuller that he's a liberal, he's going to say, you will have a smile from ear to ear, and very charmingly he will say, no, oh no, I'm not liberal. I'm not liberal. Some people say his smile is fixed with a piece of elastic behind his head. Be that as it may, he's convinced he's not liberal. And he's convinced he's following the Archbishop. That he's doing what the Archbishop wanted, because he argues the Archbishop tried to get back in with Rome. Yes, but only for the benefit of the faith. Only if the faith would be protected and guaranteed. And there was no question of cozying up to the Roman authorities. There was no question of encouraging people to think that Rome was all right, which Bishop Fuller, to a considerable extent, does. So, priests weakened by the modern world, liberals without realizing it, liberals without being able to realize it. This is what's terrible about liberalism. They can't see. They just can't see. It's a terrible blindness. So, worldwide extension of SPX and the push. You see that the lower of the red arrow, the red lines, is broken because the agreement has not yet been made. They're pushing towards the agreement, they've been pushing, but they've not yet made the agreement. So you can't say that the society has fallen. It's falling, but it hasn't yet completely fallen. A number of people think the society is finished. For purposes of defending the faith, it's finished. I wouldn't quite say that yet. There are still many good priests doing good work, but they aren't good enough. They're not good enough to gang up with pitchforks and advance on Mensing, which is headquarters, and force the leaders to get their act together and start defending the faith again like the Archbishop was. That's what the society needs, so that these liberals have to shake in their boots because of all the pitchforks, array of pitchforks around. That's what's needed, but it isn't there. I can remember another memory of the Archbishop. I remember he used to work, and then his health would he would get very tired and he would some people would give away his health, and so he had to spend a couple of weeks or 3 weeks in hospital. And one of these times when he was in hospital, he came out saying, I've been thinking, he said, where are the Maccabees? Where are the Maccabees? He was questioned. The Maccabees, you may remember from the Old Testament, it was that heroic Israelite family which headed up a revolution against the Greek takeover, the pagan Greek takeover of the Israeli people and of the Israeli temple. And for the true Israelis, this was absolute treachery. But most of the Israelis were going along with it. And so this Maccabee, this dad Maccabee or granddad, stood up and said, that's it. And he went off into the wilds and he said, anybody who wants to resist, come with me, and we're going to live in the wilds and we're going to fight. And he had 5 warrior-like sons, and with the help of his sons, they put up a fight, a resistance which gathered strength. The various armies came to try to beat them up, and the Maccabees beat them all. The Maccabees re-established themselves in Jerusalem. They cleansed the temple, they re-established worship, and which lasted until our Lord. It was about 150, 160, about that many years before our Lord. Then the Maccabees were this heroic resisting family at the time of the Israelites. And when the Archbishop came out of the hospital, he was saying, where are the Maccabees? Where today are the Catholics that are going to stand up and fight? Where are they? They should be there. What's going on is a disaster in the church. The Catholic Church is being destroyed, is being undermined, is being destroyed. And the mass of Catholics are letting it happen. Where are the Maccabees? Who's going to stand up and fight? He died in 1991, the Archbishop died in 1991. And by 1997, you had the founding of GREC, Groupe de Réflexion entre Catholiques, GREC, GREC, which was founded by the widow of a French diplomat. And this diplomat had said, Gilbert Perron, he said, I've been a Catholic for donkey's years, and I am Catholic. And he said, what is there more Catholic than Rome? Rome is Catholic, for heaven's sakes. But I know that Acon is also Catholic. I know the Archbishop's Catholic. The Mass, the true Mass is Catholic. His seminaries and his priests are Catholic. And Rome is Catholic. There's got to be a way of bringing these together, he says. Wait for it. I am no theologian, he says, but I am a diplomat. And so, as a diplomat, I say, Rome, lift the excommunications on these bishops of the society. Rome, allow again the Tridentine Mass. In other words, put water in your wine, calm down a bit, and then he turns to Acon and he says, let Acon just stop abusing Rome, let Acon be more respectful and docile towards Rome, and then we can heal this thing and bring it all together again. Bishop Felley approved of it. from the beginning. He was already Superior General from 1994. He approved. Father Duchala, a veteran priest of the Society of Saint-Terre, was writing there. But without too many people seeing, he is, Father Duchala is an éminence grise, or he's the âme damnée of this thing. He's been in and out of Rome. The Archbishop sent him out to Italy in the middle, almost with his ordination in 1976. So Father Duchala has been in Italy a long time. He's been in and out of the Roman corridors for a long time, talking to the Romans, cozying up to the Romans, being nice to the Romans, transmitting messages, taking messages, transmitting, acting as a kind of conduct between the society contact. The Archbishop was never particularly interested in. Well, he did make contact with Rome during those years, because he always hoped that if only he could get Rome to budge a little in favour of tradition, it would benefit the whole church. Now that was worth it. If he could do it, it was worth it. But there was never any question of cozying up to the modernists as modernists, or pretending that modernism is not really all that bad, or pretending that liberalism has got maybe something to be said in its favour. No. He never shifted from the doctrine. And therefore, there was never any question of compromise with Archbishop Lefebvre. But with Gilbert Perrol and with Greg, we're making contact. We're going to, the contacts are going to begin by being secret, but not secret. We're not acting in secret, but people are not getting to know what we're up to. Because of course they wouldn't understand. There would be a reaction. No, you've got to, this thing is the softly catchy monkey. So we've got to fabricate and get an agreement by quiet, gentle contact without too many people knowing too much about it. That was Greg. Duchala was in it, Father Laurence was in on it, Father Schmidberg was encouraging it, Father Schmidberg, Bishop Furley, 1990s, pushing the agreement with Rome, all the more 20 years later, and re-established by Father Pagliarani inside the General Council of the Society. The result of Greg was that there were official discussions out in public by 2009 to 2011, the quote-unquote theological discussions, and Bishop Furley was seeing eye to eye with Benedict XVI. They were seeing eye to eye. They both wanted some kind of agreement to come to the discussions. The Society was still, at that point, sticking to the principle that you can't have a practical agreement without a doctrinal agreement. You've got to agree on doctrine before you're going to get together in practice. And therefore, there were several people in the Society still very suspicious, of course. So we're going to talk about theology, and both Bishop Furley and Benedict XVI hope for some kind of agreement. That is to say, Benedict XVI is a modernist, 2 and 2 are 5. Bishop Furley had the Catholic doctrine, 2 and 2 are 4. Both of them must hope that the discussions would somehow come out at 2 and 2 are 4.5. That would be the solution. 2 and 2 are 4.5. But thanks to Bishop Garreta at that time, the discussions went nowhere. Bishop Furley promised that the text of the discussions, the contents of the discussions would be published, never have been. Because if they were published, it would be too clear that there's no possibility of a doctrinal agreement. So what did they do? The discussion ended on the conclusion that there's no possibility of a doctrinal agreement. So what does headquarters of the Society do? Overnight, from the principle, no practical agreement without a doctrinal agreement. In other words, doctrine first. Suddenly there emerged a new principle, no doctrinal agreement, therefore a practical agreement. Exact opposite. There's no doctrinal agreement, therefore we're going to need a practical agreement. You see the mentality. Agreement at whatever cost. We're going to agree to disagree on doctrine. What can you do, Catholic, when you're disagreeing on doctrine? It doesn't make sense. Doctrine is far too important to Catholics. So that was what, 2012, you've got Bishop Philly announced in the spring of 2012 that there was going to be, the society was changing direction. He announced it. And he went down to Rome in June, hoping that Rome would lay down the red carpet and there would be a triumphal arch, and the society would proceed in, like the Trojan horse inside Rome, and the society would then, like the Trojan horse, spill its soldiers inside the system and convert the system. And Bishop Philly would convert Rome, he would convert the world, Bishop Philly and the society would convert Rome, convert the world. Illusion, sheer illusion. Liberals don't convert. It's very rare for a liberal to convert. A liberal has got his mind so undone that he's incapable of thinking that he needs to convert. He's incapable of thinking that he's got some serious problem, and his system is so all-embracing, so friendly, so lovely. Love, love, love. It's so sweet and nice. There's not going to be no devil any longer. There's going to be no sin any longer. Everybody's going to be loving God and adoring Him. Oh gosh, what an illusion. But that was it. So, 2012, the push towards Rome, that didn't work. The Romans slammed the door in his face, or said no, because it seemed that the other three bishops weren't agreeing. And I must tell you a story about Wimbledon, because Father Abraham and I were in Wimbledon at the time, and we used to chatter around the supper table in the evening. And I said, with this Bishop Philly had announced the change of direction, and I said, well, maybe it would be a good idea I'm going to write to Bishop Tissier to see what he thinks about this. And it's that rascal behind us today who said, why don't you make it a letter of all three bishops to Bishop Philip? Why don't all the three of you write to Bishop Philip? That was his idea. He's a troublemaker. So I thought it was a good idea. So, but he was behind that famous letter with three bishops complaining, and which, complaining to Bishop Philip about what he was doing in publicly changing the direction of the society. And the letter made a splash. They didn't stop Bishop Philip. The letter woke up a number of people that there was something seriously wrong with the society. People that hadn't yet realized. But he went ahead. Bishop Philip went ahead. And it's Rome that shut the door in his face. Probably because Rome said, if Bishop Philly hasn't got the other three bishops with him, it's going to be a split of the society. What's the purpose of pulling in half of the society and the other half starts all over again along the lines of Archbishop Lefebvre? So Rome said no. So Bishop Philly had to go back home with his tail between his legs and start all over again. But he's never relented. He's never remotely suggested that he's made a mistake, or that his policy of going in with Rome is wrong, or that that's not the direction which society should be going. On the contrary, he's absolutely convinced still that that's the right direction, and he's being reinstated inside the General Council of the society. The society doesn't look like it's going to change track. So what you see at last, at top right, you see the worldwide extension basis, and then again there's a little broken green arrow and a very little space, and it's a pointed next door, the minuscule resistance, quote unquote. That's all that there is left, so to speak. It's ridiculous to think that the resistance is all that there is of Catholicism in the world. No, there's a lot of Catholics that still keep the faith in the Novus Ordo, that keep the faith in Ecclesia Dei, that keep the faith in St. Peter's, etc. But they're on the wrong footing. They're trying to obey corrupt Rome. They're trying to keep the faith while obeying corrupt Rome. Very difficult. Pope Francis smashes Catholic things, like the Friends of the Immaculate, the Franciscans of the Immaculate. He smashed them deliberately, cruelly. There was a good bishop in Paraguay who had a seminary which was filling with young seminaries wanting to be good priests because he was doing it the old way. Francis smashed him, and he died. Kicked him out, and he died a few months later. Francis is out to destroy the church, and Bishop Willie wants to cozy up. And Bishop Willie says he and I are good friends, or we're good friends. We have a friendly relationship. I forget it. How can you hope to do anything with the church with him? How can you hope for anything much Catholic to prosper in the church under this pope? It's prospering. Any Catholic is prospering despite him. And how can the Catholic Church get back on its feet under a chief like that? A corporation is worth its manager, its general, what do you call them, the CEO, chief executive officer. Any enterprise is worth its head. The head is decisive. Better, somebody said, better a flock of lambs led by a lion than a flock of lions or a pride of lions led by a lamb. The leader is decisive. And the present leader of the Catholic Church, by a just punishment of God, is crazy, presently crazy. Now he's over in Ireland, it's causing trouble over there undoubtedly. He's got apparently a tremendous police guard, because the people are the country is afraid of the peasants rising with pitchforks and coming after it. People are getting fed up, absolutely fed up with the Pope, because all these terrible business of paedophilia and so on is coming out. The sins of the flesh are not the worst. Paedophilia is particularly grave because it smashes the innocence of a young child. I mean, that's terrible. That can be terrible. But it per se is terrible. But the sins of Satanism, which are also flourishing in the Vatican, flourishing in the governments at the highest level, those are more serious because those are spiritual sins. Satanism is spiritual sins. So you've got then the minuscule resistance. It's really not very much, but it can't be other than what it is. I don't think the resistance is capable of organisation today. I don't think. I may be wrong. If Archbishop Webb was alive, he might, with his gifts, might be able to organise it. But with no authorisation, with no authority, you can't just reach up and pluck down authority like you pluck an apple from a tree. Authority has got to come from above. It can't be snatched from below. And what authority? It's obvious that Pope Francis, nor any bishop that's under him, is going to give authority for anything traditional today. Lastly, you've got just all that remains is the column on the extreme right in green. And if you climb that column in the direction of the arrow, you can see that the column is called Heaven's Shrinking Agents. So at the time of the Counter-Reformation, it's a whole council, which is the good guys, the Council of Trent. By the time of the anti-liberal popes, it's several popes. By the time of Pius X, it's one pope. By the time of Vatican II, it's one archbishop. And so finally what you've got is, miniatures doing what they can. That's the situation we're in. And you can see a tremendous logic. Where is it heading? It's heading straight up a cul-de-sac. It's heading up a dead end. That's why I read the thing of Elizabeth Gonori Mora. When the Catholic Church is so reduced to when so much of it is reduced to ruins, when there's apparently so little left, it's going to take precisely St. Peter in his pontifical robes to re-establish authority. Because no Catholic is going to be able to argue with St. Peter in his robes. St. Peter coming down from heaven. It'll be very clear it's St. Peter, and it'll be very clear he's coming down from heaven. And it'll be very clear that he's re-establishing what God wants. No Catholic is going to argue with St. Peter. All the bad guys are going to argue with him. But they will be, by the intervention of God, pulverized, and they're going to be crippled this time. God is going to intervene. It'll take an intervention of God. So here and now, we do the little that we can, each of us in our place. We do the little that we can, but it's very limited what we can do. So, good luck, my dear friends. God bless you. And if you've got any questions or if you've got any disagreements, you're very welcome. You may well disagree that Catholicism is in such a bad way today, or that there's so little that can be done. What Our Lady asks for every time she appears is to pray the Rosary. Every time she appears, pray the Rosary. And she also says, practice the first 5 Saturdays. Practice the first Saturdays. The first 5 Saturdays are simply a special offer of heaven if you do the first Saturdays for 5 months in succession, faithfully. It's a kickstarter to get you to do the first Saturdays every month, to make reparation to his mother. And when enough reparation is made to his mother, because she's been doing all she can ever since the French Revolution, especially. St. Grignon de Montfort promised that she said that she would be playing a special role in modern times, which she has been doing, as Mother of the Church. It's Paul VI who gave her the title Mother of the Church. The bad guys at the council didn't want to get that title. She got it from Paul VI, Mother of the Church. And she's been doing all she can, and modern mankind is just turning away from God. So our Lord wants reparation to be made to his mother, and he wants it to be clear that the restoration, the turnaround, is going to come from his mother. Our Lord is going to insist that she gets the credit. It's going to be clearly her work. The consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart, and then the situation turns around. And if and when enough Catholics practice the reparation of the mother, then God will be inclined to give the grace necessary to the Pope for the consecration of Russia. And once Russia is consecrated, the situation begins to turn around. It's interesting to speculate how that might happen. Russia is already going through a serious religious revival all over this it's a huge country. A population of only, I think, under 150 million. It's not a huge population, it's a huge country. But all over, the religion is reviving. Why? Without any doubt at all, because of course the intervention of Our Lady through Orthodoxy, which is not completely un-Catholic, but also because the Russians suffered. They suffered a great deal under 70 years of Jewish rule. Communism. Communism is Jewish, Jewishness is communist. The two go absolutely together. Communism is a fabrication of the Jews, and globalism is the soft version, and it's another fabrication of the Jews, and that's the version which threatens us today. And it's more subtle and perfidious even than the hard version of communism. But the 70 years of Jewish rule was so horrible that the Russians are going back to religion. And therefore, the Jews who exterminated religion under communism are now having it backfire all over Russia, as the Russians turn back to religion. It's not the Catholic religion. The conversion of Russia will be the conversion from Eastern Orthodoxy to Eastern Catholicism, not to Latin Catholicism, not to Western Catholicism, but to Eastern Catholicism. But it will be Catholicism. And of course, it may well coincide with the restoration of the papacy, when the Russians also will recognize that the Pope, reinstated by Peter, is obviously a Catholic Pope of Christ, and not just of the West. And then they will gladly submit. They wouldn't submit to a Western Pope that seemed to them Western. They would submit to a Western Pope reinstated by heaven. I don't know. It's just a speculation. The Russians may well invade Europe, they may conquer Europe, they've got some tremendous weapons, and the Russians are ready to fight. Are the European youngsters ready to fight? Do European youngsters still believe in Europe? Do they believe that their countries mean anything? Are they ready to die for their country? One may wonder. The Russians are ready to die for Russia, that's for sure. They've been doing it in Syria. And therefore the Russians may conquer Europe. That's the point when the Pope may at last consecrate Russia. The Russians convert, and the Russian Catholics may revive the Latin Catholics. They may set an example and shame the Latin Catholics to get more who knows. We're going to see some extraordinary things in the next 20, 30 years. I don't think it'll be delayed much, but I think these events will take place before then. But it may, the wheels of God grind slowly, this is the problem. They grind exceeding small, but they do grind slowly. God is taking his time, he's taking his time, he's taking his time. But when he intervenes, it's going to be, the chastisement is going to be frightful. But take courage that, as Elizabeth Canori Morris said, faithful Catholics will enjoy the protection of the Mother of God. And for families and homes to pray now, the Rosary, to establish it now, when it's not yet blatantly and clearly necessary, when I see by faith that the Rosary is the wisest thing I can do. Any home now, from now on, praying the Rosary is sure of a better protection than the local insurance company. All of that's going to be blue sky.